In the final analysis of Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn, I feel that Team Eubank Jr. defeated Team Benn. And here's why. Chris Eubank Jr.'s trainer, Jonathan Banks, figured out that number one, that Conor Benn, being the smaller fighter, is going to have to come to Chris Eubank Jr. He said that so much in one of the videos covering their training. He says, look, he's going to come to you. You do not have to go to him. The other thing that Jonathan Banks did was he did not try to change Chris Eubanks from using those, what I determined as somewhat odd uppercut combinations. Like normally you don't throw two uppercuts to somebody's head, but Chris Eubank Jr. really likes that combination. And Jonathan Banks said to him, hey, I'm not going to try to change you because that's what you like. I'm going to just try to add on to that. And that was a smart move on his part. Third thing I think Jonathan Banks did with Chris Eubank was he really had Chris establish his jab. That, in fact, was what I think helped Chris win the fight overall. Team Benn, on the other hand, failed grossly, in my opinion, because they did not bother addressing the one big obvious factor in this fight, which was the size difference. Of course, Conor Benn's not going to gain any height, but he could have put on some quality muscle over the course of his training camp. Furthermore, Conor Benn said in the past that he wants to move up to 160. So if that was the stated objective even a couple of years ago, why didn't they get to work on that immediately? Seeing as he weighed in at around 155, I'm going to consider that to be his natural walk-around weight. I know that for me, it's not inconceivable, like to put on 10 pounds of weight myself and then cut back a little bit. And that would be a little bit under 10% of my body weight. So same token for Conor Benn. If he's 155, he could easily put on 10 pounds, go up to 165, and then just cut 5 pounds. If I can do it, 155 pound men can also do it. Now that would have taken some supreme program designing by a legit strength coach. And I say that because while you're doing your weight training, of course, you don't want that to interfere with all your boxing training. Then it would just be counterproductive. But it would be possible. It still would be possible. An expert strength coach could have Conor lifting weights 2 to 3 times a week only, not every day. And then he would also need to combine that with proper nutrition and supplementation. Again, an expert strength coach should know of a proper nutritionist that they work well with. Sadly, most of the strength coaches I see working with professional boxers are almost an absolute joke. The fellow working with Conor Benn didn't look like a complete joke, but given that Team Benn didn't figure out that they should put on a little muscle mass over the course of this last training camp, that's a major fail on their part. Now, the second fail on their part was technical in that notice how many times Conor Benn missed with that overhand right. So what they needed to do in camp was drill so that he turned his overhand right into just a heat-seeking missile and he could land it at will almost, provided he set it up properly. And that's also something that was missing from the recipe that they came up with for Conor Benn. He did not really set up that overhand right that well. Once you fail to set up an overhand right, your opponent can start to get a read on that punch and the trajectory of that punch, and then they can just make their own adjustments to avoid it. So rather than just winging an overhand right by itself, you must set it up properly with jab. No surprise. Now, should you miss with the overhand right, you also have to know what you're going to follow through with. And that would be something with your left hand, whether it's a left body shot or a left hook. You can also make a defensive move off a missed right hand and weave under to your right. Or you could block with your right hand up and then pivot out, turning clockwise. Regardless, I have to give props to trainer Jonathan Banks for coming up with a really good, solid game plan for his fighter. See, there's a big difference between a trainer telling a fighter what they should do to beat the other person and a trainer who understands the limitations of their fighter and can come up with a game plan to eke out a win versus that other fighter. Big difference. Jonathan Banks does have the knowledge and experience to be able to do that, and he showed it in this fight. So I think he deserves a ton of credit. big shout out to Jonathan Banks for defeating Team Benn.